Arabella Weston did not cry. Not when Ambrose's voice carried across the Hargreave dining room, with the particular clarity of a man who has decided that public spaces make better witnesses than private conversations. Not when 32 people set down their silverware at nearly the same moment. Not when the candles seemed to lean in. She set her wineglass down carefully, with both hands. A wife who fills her time with charity missions and servants' children, Ambrose Weston announced to the table, to the crystal, to the chandelier above, is not the wife I agreed to marry. I believe we understand each other now. The room did not make a sound. Arabella looked at him. She looked at him the way she had learned to look at things that were going to matter later. Directly, without flinching, cataloging details her face did not reveal. She noted the set of his jaw, the way he didn't quite meet her eyes even as he addressed her. She noted, too, the expression on Claudette Ravel's face, 3 seats down on Ambrose's left. That careful managed sympathy that was not sympathy at all. She had known Claudette would be at this dinner. She had known the way you know weather before it arrives. A pressure behind the eyes, a tightening in the chest, a certainty that has no name but has never once been wrong. She had said nothing to Ambrose about it. She said nothing now, either. She rose from her chair, touched the tortoiseshell comb at the back of her hair, her mother's, the one with the seed pearls, the one she wore to every occasion that mattered, and she looked at her husband across that long candlelit table. I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening, she said. Then she walked to the door. It was Rufus who brought the carriage around. Rufus had been with the Weston household for 11 years, longer than Arabella had been in it, and he had one of those faces that only showed what he chose to show. He took one look at her standing alone on the Hargreave steps without Mr. Weston and chose to show nothing at all except steadiness. Home, Mrs. Weston? Home, she said, just me. He did not ask about Mr. Weston. Either he had already heard, sound carried in the cold December streets, or he had enough understanding not to need to. She rode back to the Weston house in silence. Through the carriage window, Philadelphia moved past in its familiar winter arrangement. The row houses with their lamps burning low, the trees gone bare weeks ago, the particular quality of city darkness that was never entirely dark. She had always liked Philadelphia in winter. The cold had an honesty to it she appreciated. She had tried to tell Ambrose that once, early in the marriage, and he had looked at her with the patient expression he reserved for things he considered charming but meaningless. She had stopped mentioning winter after that. She was thinking about this on the ride home, about how much she had stopped mentioning, about the particular careful editing she had done to herself over 3 years, the observations swallowed, the preferences kept off the table, the small adjustments made to her own nature to fit into the space allocated to her in Ambrose Weston's household. She had been systematic about it. She had told herself it was patience. She had told herself it was wisdom. She had been wrong about that. She went directly to her room when she got home. Greta was there already, waiting up the way she always did, a girl of 20 with good instincts and very little sentimentality. She took one look at Arabella's face and asked nothing. She simply began unfastening the back of Arabella's dress. I need you to help me pack, Arabella said. Greta's hand stilled for one moment, then resumed. How much? She asked. What's mine, Arabella said. Only what's mine. It did not take long. 3 years of marriage, and there was not much in that house that genuinely belonged to her. She took the tortoiseshell comb. She took the 3 books from her childhood that had her name written inside the covers, given as wedding gifts. She took her correspondence and the sketching portfolio she had filled over 3 years, and the small watercolor she had painted of her family's house on Spruce Street, the one that hung above her writing desk. She took 2 dresses and the practical wool coat and the soft gray traveling dress she had always thought of as her own. Not the clothes Ambrose had approved and selected, but the ones she had arrived with. She did not take the strand of garnets he had given her in the first year of marriage, back when he still occasionally gave her things. She left them on the dressing table in their velvet box. She left them there with the same deliberateness with which she had once placed them. She sat at her writing desk and wrote a letter. It took 4 drafts. The first 3 were too long. Too much said. Too much feeling laid out in straight lines where it could be read and used against her or, worse, dismissed as mere emotion. In the end she wrote 9 sentences. She sealed it and left it on the desk where it would be found. Greta had organized the trunk with the quiet efficiency of a young woman who had been waiting, somewhere in the back of her understanding, for this moment. 1 trunk. That was all it amounted to. 3 years and a trunk. Where are we going? Greta asked. She had made clear without words that wherever it was, she was coming. Arabella had thought about this on the carriage ride home. Her mother's sister, Cressida Drummond, lived in a small house in Germantown, 6 miles north of the city. A woman who had made herself a self-sufficient and remarkably useful life out of the materials she'd been left after her husband died. She had come to Arabella's wedding 3 years ago and had said, very quietly during the reception, "If you ever need a place to land, the door is open." Arabella had not known what to do with that at the time. She had been a bride. She had been, in the specific way of practical women who are also hopeful, trying. "Aunt Cressida's," she said. Rufus drove them north through the December dark, the horse steady on roads it didn't know. Arabella sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched the city give way to quieter streets and thought about 3 years. She was not crying. She had asked herself, somewhere between packing the second dress and closing the trunk, whether she was going to cry. She examined the question with the same honesty she gave to most things. The answer was no. Not because she was not sad. She was. She was sad the way you are sad when you finish pouring water into a crack in the wall and finally understand the wall will not hold. Sad for the years spent trying. Sad for the person she had believed he might become. But, underneath the sadness, settling in slowly the way cold settles into old houses, there was something she had not expected. Something that felt almost like the return of herself. The Weston house was dark when Ambrose returned. He had told himself on the carriage ride home that she would be there. That she had overreacted. That by morning they would speak, with the practiced courtesy they had both developed over 3 years, and arrive at some sensible arrangement. She was not there. The letter was on the desk in her sitting room. 9 sentences. She had signed it with her maiden name. He read it twice. The garnet sat on the dressing table in their velvet box. The watercolor she had painted of her family's house, the small one that had hung above her writing desk, was gone from the wall. Everything else was exactly as it had been. Her room in perfect order. Nothing disarranged. Nothing left undone. Even in leaving she had not left a mess. He stood there for a long time with the letter in his hand. The first day, he told himself she would reconsider. The second day, he found that a correspondence file he needed for his Thursday meeting with the shipping agent was not simply somewhere in his study. It was exactly where Arabella had filed it, in the system she had built and maintained without ever being asked and without ever being thanked. Cross-indexed, dated, in her clear, unhurried handwriting. Finding it took 40 minutes. It had been exactly where logic said it should be. The third day, the cook came to him with a question about the household accounts that she had always brought to Mrs. Weston. He had not known there was a system for the household accounts. He had assumed the household operated the way most of his well-running systems operated, through some mechanism he did not need to understand because it had always worked. It had worked because Arabella had made it work. Every quarter, without fail, without request, without acknowledgement. The fourth day, Hargreave came by, ostensibly about a business matter, and managed to mention with the careful indirectness of a man who wants to deliver an uncomfortable truth but doesn't want to be seen enjoying it, that there was talk in the city. "What kind of talk?" Ambrose said. "The kind," Hargreave said, looking at his hat brim, "that involves your name and the word handled, and neither of them favorably arranged." He left without resolving the business matter. The fifth day, Ambrose stood in Arabella's room and looked at the garnets on the dressing table. He had not touched them. He was not going to touch them. He did not know yet exactly why, but he knew with the slow certainty of a man beginning to understand something large and uncomfortable that moving them would be wrong. They sat there like a question he had no answer for. On the 6th day, Claudette Ravel paid a call. She came with the expression she wore when she believed she had an advantage. Warm, very slightly too warm, the careful animation of a woman performing sympathetic concern. She said all the expected things. Such a difficult situation. She had been so worried. She hoped he was managing. "What did you tell me about Arabella?" Ambrose said. "Back in October. What exactly did you tell me?" A pause. "I told you what I heard," she said carefully. "About her meetings with the Halloran family. The way you described it." "Well, yes. The Halloran family," he said, "owns the building where St. Andrew's Mission operates its reading program. Arabella has been teaching children of factory workers there for 8 months, which I would have known if I had asked her, once, how she spent her Tuesday afternoons. rather than accepting your account of it without a single question. Claudette's face went carefully still. I heard. You heard what you chose to hear, he said, and you brought it to me in a form you knew I would find useful. I took it, that's mine to own, but you won't be calling here again. She left without another word. He went to find Rufus that same afternoon. Rufus had driven Arabella to Germantown 6 days ago, and said nothing about it. He had simply returned the carriage to the stable, and resumed his duties with the expression of a man who has made a decision about his own conscience and is entirely at peace with it. She's at her aunt's house in Germantown, Ambrose said. Mrs. Drummond. Yes, sir, Rufus said. A pause. Is she all right? Rufus considered this with the gravity of a man deciding exactly how honest to be. She was upright and clear-eyed when I left her, he said. I can't speak to the rest. Ambrose went to his study and started a letter. He crossed out the first 3 attempts. The 4th he sent. Cressida Drummond handed Arabella the letter without comment, which was very like her. 14 years of self-sufficient widowhood had given her a precise understanding of when words were useful and when they were not. Arabella read it at the kitchen table by the window that looked out onto the frost-stiffened garden. Then she set it down. He wrote, Cressida said, not looking up from her mending. He explained himself, Arabella said. He didn't excuse himself. There's a difference. Cressida made a small sound that was neither agreement nor disagreement. Arabella looked out at the garden. She had been at Cressida's for 8 days. In those 8 days, she had helped reorganize the larder, written 3 letters for her aunt, and begun reading lessons with Nell, the seamstress's daughter, who arrived each morning with a primer and the focused expression of a child who has decided that literacy is something she is going to acquire whether the world helps her or not. She had felt, in those 8 days, more genuinely like herself than she had in 3 years. What are you going to do? Cressida asked. Wait, Arabella said, and see what he does, not what he says he'll do. Cressida nodded once and returned to her mending. 3 days later, Mrs. Pemberton came to call. Her husband presided over the county court, and the city treated her opinions with considerable deference. She arrived with a basket of apples, and the expression of a woman who has something she feels she owes someone. She told Arabella she was sorry she had not spoken at the Hargreave dinner, when perhaps she should have. She also told her that Claudette Ravel was now telling people, carefully, selectively, in the way she did things, that there had been reasons behind what happened. Reasons Mr. Weston had been too much of a gentleman to state publicly. The room went very still. I thought you deserved to know, Mrs. Pemberton said. Thank you, Arabella said. Her voice was entirely even. After Mrs. Pemberton left, Arabella sat at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface and thought about 3 years of keeping her silence. How careful she had made herself. How relentlessly correct, how thoroughly beyond reproach. And none of it had mattered. Claudette was in the city's parlors painting a different story, and Arabella's 3 years of good conduct were no louder than a whisper next to the carrying quality of strategic doubt. She wrote to Judge Pemberton that evening, not to ask for anything against Ambrose. She separated herself from him cleanly, the way you separate a fact from its context. Asked only that the judge be willing to know her own record and her own conduct. That was all. She sealed the letter and gave it to Cressida's houseboy to deliver in the morning. Then she went to bed and lay awake thinking about silence, about how she had confused it with safety for a very long time, about how the two things were not the same. Ambrose arrived at Cressida's door on a Thursday morning. Arabella was in the front room with Nell, working through a page of compound words, when she heard the horse on the road, and then Cressida's voice at the door and then his. A sound her body recognized half a second before her mind caught up. She stayed where she was. She finished the sentence she and Nell were working through. She asked Nell to write the next 5 words on her own. Then she went to the door. He was standing in the yard. He had not brought anyone with him. Plain riding clothes. He had ridden here himself, and he looked. And this was not what she had steeled herself for, exactly. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping particularly well. Arabella, he said. Mr. Weston, she said, deliberate. She watched him hear it. I'd like to speak with you. You rode 6 miles, she said. Come in. She stepped onto the porch rather than inviting him inside, her aunt's house, her territory. She was not going to have this conversation in someone else's space by default. He told her he had spoken to Judge Pemberton, not after receiving her letter but before it. The same evening he had dismissed Claudette. He had ridden directly to the judge's house and laid out everything. He had also gone to Sister Amelia at the mission, who had confirmed not only that Arabella had been teaching there for 8 months, but that she had done it with more consistency than anyone they had engaged in years prior. He had done this, he said, not to prove anything. He had done it because he owed it to himself to know the full shape of his own error. That's more than I expected, she said. It's less than I owe you, he said. I know that. She held his gaze for a long moment. I kept things from you, she said. Not lies. I never lied to you, but I kept my observations and my unhappiness to myself because I had learned very quickly that expressing them made things harder. I made myself smaller, month by month, and I told myself it was patience. It wasn't. It was fear. She paused. I'm not telling you that to reduce your share of it. Your share is considerable. I'm telling you because it's true, and because I am done with versions of events that leave parts out. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I've been trying to understand what my share looks like without setting any of it down on your side of the ledger. She studied him. What is it you want, Ambrose, she said. A chance to try to earn back something I threw away, he said. On your terms, at your pace, with no expectation attached. She considered. Here is what I'll agree to, she said. 3 visits. Come here the way you came today, and we talk. The way 2 people trying to know each other ought to. After the 3rd visit, I'll tell you what I've decided. She held his gaze. This one counts as the first. Something moved in his face. Then I'll make it worth counting, he said. He stayed 2 hours. He told her about his father. She understood within 10 minutes that much of what she had experienced as coldness in Ambrose was the direct inheritance of a man who had raised his son to treat feeling as a liability. He laid this out without excusing himself. The way you lay out a map of territory you've been traveling without knowing its name. She told him about her mother, about the Tuesday afternoons at the mission, about what it looked like when Nell moved through a page of words with the concentrated joy of someone discovering the world is larger than she'd been told. He listened. He asked one question carefully, at the right moment, then he waited for the full answer. When he left, he tipped his hat to Cressida with the courtesy of a man who knows he is being assessed and has decided not to manage the assessment. Cressida watched his horse disappear down the road. Then she came back inside and put the kettle on. He listened, Arabella said. For 2 hours, Cressida said. He listened more than he talked. She set 2 cups on the table. In my experience, that's harder for men like him than most things they'd call difficult. Arabella wrapped her hands around her cup. The garnets were still on the dressing table at the Weston house. She had not gone back for them. Ambrose had not moved them. Neither of them had spoken of it. That, she thought, was a whole conversation neither of them had needed to put into words. The 2nd visit came 10 days later. He sat on the porch in the January cold and told her things he had apparently told no one. About a stack of letters he had found in his mother's things. Letters she had written to a woman in Boston. About wanting to study painting seriously, but having been told by everyone around her, including his father, that it was not a sensible use of her time. He had found them the previous year and had not known what to do with them. Arabella said nothing for a moment. Then, she would have found Nell very good company. He looked at her. Something opened in his face that she had no precise word for. I imagine she would have, he said quietly. They talked for 3 hours. When he left, Cressida stood on the porch beside Arabella and said nothing for a long time. One more, she said finally. One more, Arabella agreed. The 3rd visit came on a Wednesday morning, and she knew before he arrived that it would be the last one. She knew it with the settled certainty of a woman who has spent enough time in her own company to trust her own reading of things. He came to the door and she saw his face, and understood that he had arrived at the end of something, not in defeat, but in arrival. A man who has walked a great distance, and is now standing at the place he was walking toward. They walked the edge of the property. The morning was clear and very cold, the kind of cold that makes the world feel precise. After a while he said he needed to tell her something he had been trying to find the right words for. Say it without finding the right words, she said. That tends to be more accurate. He looked at her. Then he said, I was in my study trying to write to you, and I went to the window the way I do when I'm stuck, and I looked out at everything I own, the house, the business, all of it, and I realized I was wondering whether any of it meant anything. Not in the ordinary way, in a real way. Whether it was worth the kind of man it had required me to be. He paused. And then I thought about the way you walked out of the Hargreave house, The way you spoke to me. The way you left that house in order and signed your maiden name to 9 sentences. And I thought, that is what it looks like when a person knows exactly who they are. Arabella felt something move in her chest. She held it steady. I'm not a mirror, she said. I'm not here to reflect you back to yourself. If I come back as a separate person, with her own work and her own mind. I know that, he said. That's not what I meant. I know it isn't, she said. I'm saying it anyway, so we're both entirely clear. We're clear, he said. A pause. Are you going to tell me what you've decided? She looked at the frost on the garden, at the road running east back toward the city, at the bare tree at the property's edge. Then she turned to face him. Here are my terms, not for a trial, for a real thing. She held his gaze without wavering. The mission work continues, my schedule, my decisions, without comment or opinion from you unless I ask. If it is ever inconvenient, that inconvenience is not a reason. Agreed. Greta comes back with me. Her position is hers for as long as she wants it. I haven't stopped paying her wages, he said quietly. She left because of me. It seemed the least that was owed. Arabella looked at him for a moment. She added that to the accounting she had been keeping. When I have something to say, she continued, I say it. I don't manage it for your comfort first, and when I say it, I expect to be heard, not agreed with necessarily, heard, and if I am dismissed, I will say so, and we will have that conversation too. Yes, he said, just that, plain and without performance. I choose this freely, she said, not because it is expected, not because I am afraid of the alternative. I come back because I have looked at you honestly over these past weeks and I have seen something I believe is worth choosing. She held his gaze. Can you take those terms as they are, without amendment? Yes, he said again. She nodded once. Then here is what we'll do. I'll come back to the house at the end of the month. That gives us both time to understand that what was just decided was decided clearly, and not in the warmth of a moment. She let him hear all of it. And when I come back as Arabella Drummond Weston. Both names. Not one swallowed by the other. Both names, he said. He said it the way you say the name of something you intend to respect. She offered him her hand. Not a wife's hand extended to a husband. The hand of one person to another who has said something that can be agreed to. He took it. His grip was brief and careful and without any presumption at all. She went back inside. Cressida was at the kitchen table doing absolutely nothing, which was so unlike her that it was its own kind of commentary. End of the month, Arabella said. Cressida stood up and put the kettle on. Nell arrived 20 minutes later, with her primer and her serious face. She looked at Arabella and asked, without preamble, Are we starting? We're starting, Arabella said. She sat down at the table and opened the primer to the page they had left, and the morning settled around them. The kettle, the cold window, Nell's focused quiet, Cressida moving steadily through the kitchen. All of it familiar now. All of it, in the way that mattered, hers. She was not decided about everything. Some things were still forming, still finding their shape. But she was no longer afraid of the forming. She had spent 3 years making herself smaller, and she was done with that. Done with the quiet that was not patience but surrender. Done with the version of herself that had shrunk trying to fit into a room that had never been built for her. She would build the room herself. Outside, January held its cold over the township, and 6 miles east Ambrose Weston was riding back toward a house that had been showing him for weeks, exactly where she had been standing. He rode without hurrying. He had somewhere to be eventually. But he was learning, at some cost and with a slowness he was no longer trying to rush, that the space between where he was and where he needed to get to was not an inconvenience to be crossed quickly. It was the actual work, and he was beginning to understand that doing it right would take everything he had, and that everything he had might, for the first time, be worth giving. Arabella turned a page. Nell read on.